Good evening, everyone. And I also want to do something in the spirit of entrepreneurship and congratulate Krista on her sale of Kerpoof to Disney. So a round of applause for Krista on that successful exit. We always love that in the entrepreneurial community, those nice, successful exits. So well done. And now we know Krista is at Disney as general manager of the Disney Interactive Group. And you will be just as envious as I am that when you get mail from Krista now, she has these little Mickey Mouses on her signature line of all of her email messages. So that's something that's pretty cool. Krista, you really have an impressive technical background. Why don't you just spend just a minute and tell us what that is and how it impacted you to become an entrepreneur?
Okay, so can I just say, when Bell Labs fellow tells you have an impressive technical background, that's nice. So thank you. A lot of people don't know I'm an electrical engineer, first and foremost, and started in such a different space. I actually worked at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory for 11 years, where I created custom electronics for high-energy physics experiments, and tremendous experience. I actually got to work around the world. I worked in biomedical applications. I worked at CERN. I actually worked on LHC, for those of you who are familiar with the Large Hadron Collider. That was the last project. I, by year 11, realized I had managed informally a team of 15 people for an experiment at LHC at Stanford. And I realized that I really liked leading people. And so I went to the management of the lab and said, I'd like to formally go into management. I think I'm good at it and I'd like to do it. And they said, maybe in 30 years. You're not anywhere near experienced enough. About 30 at this time. And of course, there's people in Silicon Valley. I'm in Berkeley. People in Silicon Valley who are starting companies and CEOs at 20. And so I thought, maybe I should try a corporation. So I went to Xilinx, which is a high-tech company. And it's probably too much information, but it's funny to think back on. I actually was so petrified. It was the only place that offered me a position as a manager, and I was managing 2 people. I remember saying to my boss, well, if I really screw it up, can I just go back to being an individual contributor? And he said, yes, that's fine. And I thought, well, at least the worst would happen. I would ruin these 2 people. So anyways, it went very well. And
those 2 people aren't out there, are they?
And grew that team to a large team, and then was asked to grow a second team in Boulder, and they moved me out here. And that was high-speed networking equipment, so 10 and 40 gigabit applications for the networks companies, Cisco and Nortel. And what was interesting about that experience, which does feed to eventually being an entrepreneur, is that I realized how competitive I was. And I didn't know that in research. But when I came to Xilinx, Xilinx, for those of you who don't know, has sort of one competitor. It's kind of like Hertz and Avis. And if they're Hertz, then Avis is Altera. And I just very quickly wanted Altera to be dead. I just stomp on them to go away. It was just ridiculous. This wrathful person came out of me, which was very interesting. And I would go to salespeople when we lost design wins where my product was involved, and I would say, well, what do you mean we lost? My product was involved. And they said, well, Krista, your product is a small piece. There's the price of the silicon. There's all these other things. No, when my product's involved, we should win every design win. And so I would go and meet at these boardrooms, and they'd say, what could have I done that we would have won? Well, we, learned from that. Anyways, I could talk about that all day. So that was interesting. And from there, left to start Kerpoof.
Well, and that, I think your technical background has a lot to do with your success as an entrepreneur in tech. Really curious what inspired you to start Kerpoof. You could have gone on in corporate careers, for forever, managing people and having exciting technical projects. Why did you start Kerpoof?
So specifically Kerpoof, or just being an entrepreneur and leaving corporate America?
Kerpoof.
Kerpoof. Oh, you really know Kerpoof. Okay. Well, first of all, I'll say that when we left to start a company, we had no idea what we were going to do. We didn't leave thinking we were doing Kerpoof. We actually left not knowing what we were going to do. We had decided that we had a lot of design skills, that we would form a consulting company to bootstrap, and that we would be able to make enough money consulting to start an internet startup. And we knew we wanted to do something in the web consumer space. Everything we talked about or dreamed about was all web consumer, that we had zero experience or knowledge in. And so when we talked, everything that we were drawn to were ideas around design. And initially, all our ideas were around design for adults, design tools and sites. And then at some point, someone said, well, we should do something for kids. They create all the time. And so we thought, oh. And none of us imagined at this time. So we don't know web, we don't consumer, none of us have kids. So we decided to go and look and see what was there. And in fact, it was really disheartening because there was nothing there. So you have these powerful machines and powerful tools that are being created for adults. And for kids, it was pretty much video, much an extension of the TV, really bad spacebar games. And the more I learned, the interesting thing is all of that wonderful educational software that probably many of you know, Carmen Sandiego, KidPix, with the death of desktop software, just died away. Nothing really replaced it. And so we got very excited about this. And just the more we thought about it, the more excited we got about it.
Well, and how many of you have been to the Kerpoof site? It's just a wonderfully designed site. I go play there even though I'm not a kid. It's just gorgeous. Now, tell us a little bit of how that market then evolved. You left not knowing you were really going to start this kind of a company. You did some research. You got excited about the spaces. How did you see that market then develop after you made that decision, and how did you build that brand up of kids and their relationship to computing and having fun and designing?
So, she asked a couple of questions there. Two of which that are important to answer. One, what we did to build brand, I think, is a really important thing, because I think we did many things badly, but that we actually did reasonably well. And then, so in terms of how that market evolved, one of the things that was interesting when we started is, and even is still true today, there's very few people doing stuff for creativity for kids. So there's lots of kids. So we certainly had competitors. In fact, I viewed Disney.com as a competitor, and when they initially approached us and wanted to see our roadmap, I refused to show them. I told them I viewed them as a competitor. And I would show them my roadmap when they showed me theirs. So it seems actually sort of funny in hindsight. Directly in what we were trying to do, there wasn't really a litmus of, hey, they're doing that really well. But what we did do was we did look at websites that were doing very well. And the longer story is we launched Kerpoof in 2007, January 2007, and they didn't come. We thought the millions would come, and they didn't. And I think there was really a question of, wow, maybe everyone was right. We should just go do a Xilinx FPGA product. And there was sort of a little crisis. And it's interesting, it was at that point that we really started doing market research. Now, you have to understand that prior to launching, we thought we did market research. But the problem as an entrepreneur is when you really love your idea, you find the data to back it up. You just can. You can do that really easily. But when you're really looking at potentially failing or having your site not working, then you really look in a different way. And we learned some very interesting things, and we put together a strategy that did make our site viral, and we were able to turn it around. And I do think sometimes with entrepreneurs, the tendency is to throw everything away and start again, and sometimes a small correction, there is value there in a small correction. So coming to brand, because I think a disadvantage that we had in what Entrepreneur doesn't is there's of course no marketing budget. And so I think the things that work for us, and I did think about this because I wanted to share, because I thought, well, what could I share with potential entrepreneurs that would be valuable? And I think this is one of those things. So one thing we did that was very interesting is we went to conferences. So it turned out that I could, in a pretty short order at a conference, meet influencers. A great example of this is Duster Magic. It's limited to 60 people. It's a small group of people. And this just being very aware of everything was happening, I attended. The head of Parents' Choice was there. The head of Yahoo Kids was there. The head of New York Times, the technical writer for New York Times was there. So, and they let entrepreneurs that are there demo new products, or anyone. Fisher-Price demoed something, and Lego demoed something. So it's a very eclectic group of people. But I immediately got to develop colleagues, because one of the worst things about what we did switching markets, and it's fine, follow your passion, do it, and that's great, but you don't, right, if you looked at the certain high-tech arena, I had tons of contacts that I could call on, and if you, in the kids space, I had none. So sort of having to really quickly create meaningful context there. And so that was, I think, really successful. We also read a lot. We're all readers. And so, for instance, there was a Sesame Workshop's Cootie Center published a very important paper called D is for Digital by Carly Schuler, a 60-page document that there's on page 34 mentions Kerpoof. And so I just emailed to the director and said, we were so delighted to be mentioned in this seminal paper. And he said, oh, little did you know, everyone at Sesame Workshop loves Kerpoof and plays on it all the time. And I ended up meeting him. He was coming out to Colorado. I drove down to Colorado Springs. I met with him. They had an inaugural event for their digital media center. They invited me to be a speaker on that. In fact, that talk is on YouTube. So again, like just those kind of connections are really important, but we wouldn't have had that connection if we hadn't been sort of aware of what people were saying and writing. So that was good. I think partnerships were critical. So a really good example of that is I met Lucy. So Lucy and I actually do know each other part of this event, and I met her, and we were talking about what we were doing, and she's saying, so she runs National Center for Women IT. They want to get kids involved, and girls in particular interested in technology. And they were going to work with these big corporations to create a tool to let kids learn a little programming. And I said, oh, we shouldn't do that with Microsoft. You should do that with us. We would do a much better job. And that led to the Movie Maker. Lucy actually was an advisor to us for an NSF grant where we got $100,000 and we launched the Movie Maker. That partnership's ongoing. It's also with another corporation, another nonprofit called BizWorld. And so that partnership, right, so they have context that we don't have. So I think that was good. And then the last thing, the last two things, it is long-winded, but I do think these worked out for us, especially sort of not having any money and being scrappy, is one of the things I did is I got a marketing sales advisor. And pretty much everything I did was wrong. So the first thing I did was I told her that my plan for getting press, and I had showed her my list of the top 20 largest circulation, and I had been calling them and trying to get their attention. And she said, that's all wrong. You need to build your local media support. It was the best advice I ever got. And so I completely turned my attention to local media, and you learn a lot doing that. And in fact, that was a much better strategy for us. And in fact, at one point, we had almost 20x the traffic in Colorado that we did compared to the rest of the United States, which really goes to show you that print media is not dead, and even a crappy little article mention about your company has this really big positive effect. And then the other thing there's not a lot of these, but they're good if you can get them. We got, I think, lucky. Again, reading TechCrunch, being very aware of what was going on in the community, both for kids, but also technology in general. And TechCrunch launched TechCrunch 50. And it was supposed to be like, the whole idea was instead of demo where you pay, the entrepreneur pays to demo their product, they were going to make it free to entrepreneurs. And so that's a whole different story, but we did put our name in the hat and did get that. And the reason that we wanted to get it turned out to have lots of benefits, but the best reason is I knew that international press was going to be there, and that's where we got international traffic. So we started getting international traffic after presenting there, and even though there wasn't impressive press, it was like bloggers and stuff, but it doesn't take much. And so then for a while, Moscow and I think still Moscow and Australia are two of our highest places of traffic, and that really comes from TechCrunch. So very long-winded, but there you go.
It's very interesting. and you're speaking about money, which I'm sure many people are eager to know about how you decide to fund an entrepreneurial venture. There are all kinds of options, and I know you took a particular path. So why don't you say a bit about how you funded this and why you chose to do it that way?
So I think the first thing that I would say about that is I know entrepreneurs, including myself, I think there's this feeling that you're going to have an idea, you're going to be passionate about it, write a business plan about it, and that there's a line of people waiting to write you a check. And you're sort of sift through them and pick the ones you like or don't like. And the reality is, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, particularly if you're going into a space that you have no expertise, I wasn't a VP from Hasbro, good luck. Right? So most people I met with, and we because we had the consulting, I don't feel like our hearts were ever in raising money. I mean, I'd like to believe if I really made that my mission, I would have succeeded. But we did meet with people. I did meet with VCs and angels. And by and large, they said, well, we think you're crazy. When you come back to your senses and do something with FPGAs, let us know and we'll fund that. So again, so that should keep that in mind. I think the other thing, I had an advisor. Let me back and say that a seminal thing for me to become an entrepreneur was a ski trip I took. And I think this is so. I think this is so important. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but was definitely too afraid. Didn't think it was something I could do. And I went on a ski trip, and some mutual friends had invited two people who happened to be CEO founders of their own companies. So one was Jerry Fiedler of Wind Rivers, which of course was grown to $1 billion company. And they both were like, "Oh my God, you'd be an amazing CEO. You have to do it. You should do it. You're meant to be one." And we spent a week together skiing together, so they sort of got to know me. So this wasn't sort of just a shallow thing. It felt real, and it felt really encouraging. It was the first time I really thought about it. And so it just still took me 2 years to find 4 people to do it with me. But anyways, he is an advisor. Wind River started with consulting. And they consulted for 9 years before they sort of honed in real-time operating systems as a product. And I thought that was such a great model. And so when I met the 3 people, that we decided to do this company with, I said, here's the thing. I think we're really talented. We've had a lot of success. I think we're going to bumble along. I think we'll get it wrong the first time. We'll get it wrong the second time. But I feel like if we stick together and we have a bootstrap model that's sustainable, eventually we'll hit it out of the park. I think that could be 15 years. Like, are you signing up for the 15-year plan? Because if you're not, that's what I think we're doing. And I think everyone sort of philosophically felt like, let's bumble along and make mistakes and just keep trying to do it. And I don't think that's right for everyone, but I think that was really right for us.
So just to take off on that answer for just a minute, you said the VC said when you come back to your senses. What kinds of feedback did they give you? Because ultimately it wasn't exactly right? So right. And you didn't give up. So what specific things did they say to you about? You didn't have the experience in the space, or? Yeah,
I mean, entirely that. And I mean, it makes sense. If I was going to invest in someone, I would not have invested in us. Just because if you meet an entrepreneur, you want to know that they have contacts. I think that Rolodex, I mean, they talk about it, but it's true. It's so important. And I do think I was able to create it. But I mean, I wouldn't lie to you. It was certainly a challenge, right? A bigger challenge than if I'd had those contacts. All of which I had in our consulting business. Okay, so our consulting business was an FPGA-based consulting business. And when I met with the VCs and they asked us about our background, we are all 4 very well known in that market. We've published multiple papers. We've been represented with IEEE. In fact, I did an IEEE talk in this very room. So they felt like that was our expertise and our context. Our consulting company in 2007 made $700,000. And my advisor at some point said, and we ignored that company, and we were turning away work. And my advisor said, so you have a company that's profitable that you're ignoring, and you have a company, Kerpoof, that's making no money, that you're struggling with. Like, why don't you grow the consulting company? And for us, that wasn't our passion. And I think, sometimes being an entrepreneur is being crazy. I mean, I don't know. You would never do it, right? You would never quit a good corporate job and that it was secure and paid well. And I mean, Xilinx is a great place. I mean, I worked with amazing people. You would never do that if you weren't a little insane. Like, I think there has to be a little bit of that. And so when a VC says to you, "You're crazy," you say, "Yeah, I'm crazy." Crazy. You're going to regret it. You're going to wish you invested in me. Right? And this sort of part of the bravado and the chutzpah. And later think, what was I thinking? Like, I so should have failed. But I think that is a piece of what makes an entrepreneur.
You've mentioned your team a few times, and people are probably curious to know, how did you assemble your team? How did you motivate them and keep them going with this kind of a model? Did you pay them salaries, or were they in it in the same way that you were in it, or how did that work?
It's an important question, and by the way, I really feel like it's so weird because I wasn't that long ago in the audience, because I used to come to things like this I remember listening to different entrepreneurs and thinking, oh, give me a gem that will make me successful. So I think honesty is really important, and sharing these paths is really important. So let's see, money. We started with $50,000 of our own money. We had an agreement to not take salary the first year and put all the consulting money we got back into the business. We would have not taken salary longer, but that was as long as that some of us could go without taking salary. So we just gated it by need and when we had burned through savings. we felt very strongly, to answer your question about employees, that while employees that got, and we did give equity to employees, to full-time staff, that they got, while they got equity, we still gave them close to market salaries, slightly below, but not grossly below. We also had benefits that in many ways were better than Xilinx. We had health care. I got a cheap health care plan, as cheap as they ever are. And what I did was I signed up for the highest deductible, but I just covered the deductible for anyone who needed to cover the deductible and never had to. No one had to. Someone had $100, hurt their wrist, had $100 in the thing for the ER. That was the most I ever had to pay for a deductible. But it was a good option for us. We had 401k after the first year. We had, people from Xilinx would come visit us or go to lunch with us. They'd be amazed. 3 monitors, good chairs, good light, good place. Very contrary to what I think a lot of people do, but we really felt like we live here. This is what we do. It can't be uncomfortable. People need to have the equipment they need. They need to feel like they're covered from a health insurance. But so for us, it was really important when we brought staff on that they wouldn't get not only equity, but they would be really in a cared environment. They'd feel good about being there. So, because at the end of the day, even when you give equity, the reality is you're not going to give equity to employees in the same sense that you give that the founders have or VC has. You just don't. Typically, there's exceptions, but typically employees get considerably less, and so their risk should be, I think, equally. Commensurate with that, because the likelihood is that you're going to fail, and so you have to be careful how much you ask, depending on how much equity you give. And I would say even there we were generous. I mean, people would say, "Wow, that's usually what you give to CEOs and VPs." Whatever. You have to do what feels right to you, and we brought talent in. In terms of motivating people, it's interesting. Mostly what we hired at first were engineers. I guess it's not true. But the engineers we hired at first were people that had worked for me at Xilinx that followed me. I still have people at Xilinx who want to come and follow me. And Jonathan, and so there were 4 founders, and Jonathan and Brent worked together at Xilinx, and me and Tom worked together. And while we ate lunch together a lot and fantasized about doing a startup, we actually didn't as a foursome work together. We worked as 2 teams. And so for both those 2 teams, we have hired people, more than one person from those teams, which means that the management at Xilinx does not love us. But we've never recruited. They've always come to us. And so I think the reason for that is startup at Xilinx or wherever, I think if you, with employees, doing something that matters and people believe that it matters, giving people genuine responsibility, acknowledge people for great work, I mean, sort of those simple things, people will move mountains and they will come, right? I mean, people who come say, I was happiest when I was working in your team, and I just want part of that again. And in fact, I had a person who came to me and his wife was pregnant, and I said, "You can't come. You can't. This is too risky. I just, no." And so he waited long enough so his wife could have the baby under health care for Xilinx, and then he kept coming back to me, and I finally agreed, but I was so worried that he was taking on too much risk.
Well, it sounds like building your team and motivating your team was certainly one thing that you did right. If you were to name one other thing that you did right, for sure, what would it have been? Okay, 2 things that you did right. 3.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, for some reason, I'm not having like one thing really jump out to me. It's more so many little things that putting a lot of weight on one of them. But I think. I don't know. This just can't be everyone's path because everyone can't start a consulting company. But I think if you can, even if you take money, build into your plan some sort of bootstrap. I think that there was a huge freedom with that. And it was messy and painful and awful. Like all we wanted to work on Kerpoof, and we'd have to go do our consulting work, which was not where our heart was. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like a bed of roses, right? This is running, I ran 2 companies, and which was the easy part. It was actually the people who had to write code for Kerpoof and then had to design embedded systems for military. I mean, it's just crazy, right? Two different places. So But I do think that by bootstrapping, even if it's kind of a not great. So I think one of the things we did is that model, which, I think if the right investor had come along, and in fact, truth be told, one thing is if you do stick it out and eventually get enough success, they will come to you. Eventually, after year 2, we did have VCs come to us. And when we sold to Disney, we were in the process of closing an A round. And that was someone who had come to us, not the other way around. And so we were in a position to be picky. So the other thing, I think we did well, but again, like bootstrapping, I think it's a hard thing to say for any entrepreneur to do, but we genuinely, when we sold, were happy not to sell. In fact, when Disney came, we said, couldn't you come back in a year? Like, we really love you, and we'd love to be bought by you. Like, you're like our dream person, but not now. Like, it's a bit early. We want to build a lot more value, and couldn't we just talk in a year? And I think that sense of that, in hindsight, kind of craziness, like the finances are about to drop the whole economy, but that genuine belief and passion in what we were doing, and I don't know, if that's something we did or not. I think people make the mistake of working in a basement with crappy equipment, and I think if you're an internet high-tech startup, that's not a place to save money. And I am the most cheap person. Like, the one thing everyone hated about me. The other good thing I did, I was cheap.
It was your own money.
Yeah, but I'm cheap anyways. Yeah. But that served me really well. It was the first time that being cheap really served me well. So I remember someone saying, "Couldn't we buy some pens?" I brought in this old pot of grubby pens and pencils, and I said, "There's the pot. That's your pens, that's your pencils." I'm not buying pens. I think there's things to be cheap, and then it's actually a stupid thing. And they just give me a hard time. That was a dumb thing to spend. Sometimes I'm cheap across the board, but there's things to be. Especially services, my rent, I actually, got convinced the person to start our rent lower and then periodically increase it over time. So it would be disproportionately higher in year 3 than year 1 when we'd had less money. And we had a couple of service providers that I negotiated to be cost lower. So I was just willing to ask anyone for less. Anyone who did anything for us, I would say, well, we're just little entrepreneurs. We have no money. You can do it for less. And we got, there's one of the beautiful things about being in this country and being an entrepreneur is there's such a warm welcoming as an entrepreneur. You say you're an entrepreneur and they go, "Oh, you're an entrepreneur. Oh, that's wonderful." And so because of that, people really are. They're really generous. I had an advisor, and we had our first kind of HR thing, and I realized we had no manual. We had no something like that. And I called my advisor. He said, "Oh, when my last company that we raised $120 million, we paid a ridiculous sum to create an HR policy manual. I'll just send it over." And that's very generous, right? I just think that's incredibly generous to do that. And I have since sent it to someone else. This poor policy manual is sort of going everywhere. And I edited. There were things that weren't appropriate to us. I'm not saying that you just take that, but it is. Anyways, enough said.
Well, you're talking about the generosity of spirit that you met, as you were starting Kerpoof. Maybe expand a little bit more about what you see with the Boulder community, the Boulder entrepreneurship community. What kind of support in general did you find there? Because many people here who are maybe thinking about starting a company or have already, we live and operate here in Boulder.
Absolutely. Certainly for qualify as I know nothing else, right? It's the only community I know. But I'm amazed. And it's funny because when I was at Xilinx, I think if you're not in the entrepreneur community, you just don't see it. And there's this whole little ecosystem that goes on in Boulder. And there's meetups, and there's just so many things to plug in and meet people. And the MIT Entrepreneur Series and this series, and that you can absolutely before or after meet someone and connect to someone. I met so many people that way. And then the generosity of time, I just can't imagine. I remember meeting someone, and they said, "Oh, I know the person who started one of the Exabyte founders. I'll introduce you. I bet he would talk to you." He ended up being an amazing advisor to me, and he didn't know me from a hole in the wall. And then also, let me tell you the other interesting thing, because the first time I met Brad Feld, I think he was pretty underwhelmed. And he said, "Well, this is, cool, but it's not my space. I don't really care about kids. I don't really do this." And I said, "Well, it's fine. Can you just introduce us to these 3 people?" And he said, "Yeah." And actually, to his credit, did it. A lot of people say they'll do stuff and then they don't do it. So he did it. But we dropped out of touch with him, but we kept building value, and we were starting to be heard about a little bit. And then we got into TechCrunch, and we were sort of panicking because we were going to present I was presenting in front of 2,000 people, and what to present and how to present. And so everyone was like, "Wow, wouldn't it be great if Brad would help us?" And I'm like, "Well, let's ask." He was like, "Come on over right now." And we're like, really? So I went over there and I won't use his colorful language, but I did my dry run, and he hated my presentation. Like, he just ripped it apart, and it was 10 times, 100 times better because of him. So, that was, again, another and he ended up actually after that becoming a full, I don't know if he would call himself advisor, but he was absolutely, gave us a lot of advice along the way, particularly in the cell. But so there's someone who, I think gives a lot to the community, maybe not necessarily at the beginning because he can't mentor, everyone that comes to him, but as you have sticking power and you stay around, you also get people like that who are willing to help you later down the line.
I just wanted to ask a tag-along question to that. For students in the audience who think they might want to start something someday, would you recommend that they reach out to people like you and other entrepreneurs in the community now, or to wait until they have some sort of idea that they're trying to pitch or to sell or to get advice?
Okay, so this is such an easy question to ask because I really believe if you want to be an entrepreneur, you need to grow thick skin and not be afraid of no. All someone can do is say no. They're too busy. So it just never hurts to ask. I ask people all the time for all kinds of things. That served me well. That's another thing. See, they're coming now. So, being able to do that. And it doesn't matter if you can't do it. MIT did a really interesting study that the study was, let's see, there is gain up to 5 founders before you get to diminishing returns. So I always thought 2 would be the best. I always thought we were sort of awkward with 4. We can't vote. How do you split the vote? It's just such a mess. And I always thought, wouldn't 2 be tidy? Be some nice tidy 2. But it's not. It's actually 5, which I think is so interesting. So you don't have to have all those skills, right? It makes sense. You just have to find someone who has those skills. And let me not undermine that you just find someone with the skills. I mean, obviously, here's the thing. I think there's no stress like doing a startup. I mean, none. And I read every book. I'm a reader, and I just think nothing prepared me. I think it's way worse than the stress of a marriage, the stress of a divorce, the stress of any of those stresses. I've never had a divorce, but I have seen people have divorces, and they're horrible. I think it's worse. Worse. It's so stressful. And so who you choose to do a company with needs to be someone that you really trust. I actually think the best people to do a company with are people that you've been done a class project together if you're a student, or in our case, worked together at Xilinx. I had worked with Tom for 7 years. I know him incredibly well. Whatever, that relationship was so solid. You could sort of throw anything at us and we would be solid. So that's good. So total segue from what you asked, but having someone in your founder group being willing to ask anyone, anything, anytime, really helpful.
Well, and I've heard it said, and I believe it's really true, that no is just the first step to yes. That's an old sales, philosophy. So,
which I could have used. So I didn't use that. When I got a no, I sort of said goodbye. I think I could have used a little more, but I could ask anyone. But I was pretty respectful of the no's. Whereas we know a mutual. Sue Kuntz is an entrepreneur who said that to me when I told her that a couple of the people who I had pitched to finance us had said no. She said, oh. That's just the beginning. And so
that's right.
She said it was very good.
They just didn't finish their sentence. What they meant to say was no, not yet.
Oh, right.
They just didn't finish their sentence. Right. So I want to ask one question about your most significant obstacle or challenge. We interview a lot of entrepreneurs who start IT companies, and it's very interesting, along with W3, who's here. I'll give them a plug. And it's very interesting that entrepreneurs' single biggest challenge seems to line up in one of a few places. And so we're just curious to know what
you're testing me.
I'm testing you.
Yeah, I think you're testing me. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, I think mine is very specific. Right? Here's the thing. It used to be to build a brand, to go into the consumer space, took about $50 million. And so most people believe it no longer takes $50 million. But it doesn't take zero. I mean, it is really tough. There's a lot of noise out there, and we all have the right to be distracted. And so to build a new brand is incredibly hard, right? To build it's entirely dependent on viral, right? You can do these other things that I've described, but in my mind, building awareness. So when we would show kids or parents Kerpoof, we knew we were onto something. We genuinely felt like we were onto something, any audience. But then just try to expand from that is really hard, right? How do you get people to be aware? And then add to that most people actually only go to 2 or 3 sites. I mean, people think people really surf around, but most people have a habit and they go to a few places. Occasionally, 4 people will say something to them, so then they'll go try it. But it's a huge barrier. Most people go to Facebook, they go to Google, like this very specific. And if you go to Google, it's to find out information. I want to find a cheap flight. I want to find this. It's not to find a new website that you're going to go to daily and obsessively, which is what, as a website developer, we want, right? We want something that's sticky. I mean, for developing for kids, we also want something that's good for kids because there's stewardship there, but that's the point, right? You're building something that's sticky. So I don't know if I answered that correctly, but I think building brand was a real challenge.
I know it is in the web space. Building brand is very difficult. So now you've started Kerpoof. You're some months, years into it. When did you first think Kerpoof was succeeding? And what did that look like or feel like?
Yeah, no, I mean, our first month-to-month over 30% growth, I think we just were ready to, I felt like that there should be trumpets sounding on the rooftops. In fact, it was really hard because it was so anticlimactic, and I felt like, why? I'd just meet people. Why aren't you happy? This is so exciting. It's happening. So for us, if you're a website, it's really traffic. It's really, it's just like having any consumer product. The success of it is how many people are consuming it. And we had this period of time where we did careful market analysis, we put a plan in place, and before we had even put that plan fully into place, we started to see the traffic growth happening. And that was when it really felt we had something. In fact, I'll tell you what happened is, at some point we had clarity, we thought, because while I had, at the very beginning, talked to investors, very soon we stopped. We didn't talk to investors. We just decided we'd build value. We had this bootstrap model. But we knew it wasn't ideal because all the consulting time was taking away from the product. So the question was, when do we really go for it? Really go for a large A round and try and do it. And we decided that once, so I'll tell you something that a VC told me that was really helpful. It's when VCs want to invest. So essentially, and it varies from market to market, but essentially something like 30 to 70,000 monthly uniques. Usually a company that has 30 to 70,000 monthly uniques, you're probably onto something interesting. May survive, it may not. Once you get to 200,000 monthly uniques, if you look historically, companies that have gotten to 200,000 monthly uniques have not gone away. They're still here. So VCs view that as too late. They should have invested earlier. So there's sort of a period. And so we sort of felt like, and Chris Scoggins, who's a local, another, right? I met with Chris Scoggins to pitch him, and at the time, I was asking for a fairly small amount of money. I don't remember what it was. It was like, why would you ask for such a small amount of money? And I said, well, that's what I know how to put to work. I don't know what I would do with more money than this. And he said, well, I assure you can do with more money than this. Bring your finances with me. I'll go over them with you. He spent 2 hours with me going over my finances and pointing out all the ways that I had not thought about that we should be spending money, largely on marketing, actually. My place, and I think coming from an engineering background, something that I would do differently if I did another company is I would pay, again, in the consumer space, a lot more attention to marketing and PR. I think some money could have been spent wisely earlier with PR. But anyways, so we kind of had this sense of when the traffic would be the time that we would dump consulting, which was kind of our safety net, and really give it everything. And about that time, when again, so we had just, it's ironic, right? So that starts to happen before we'd even reached out to anyone. VC started contacting us. And then it was a nice situation because I would meet and think, I don't like you. I'm not going to work with you. But we did meet one that we liked a lot with. And we were working on terms. We were really ready to sign. At the end of the day, just that VC really loved what we were doing. He had kids and he believed in the vision and wanted to build it. And so we thought, because it's funny, when you get a VC, at least for us, it was really bringing on another founder. It felt like that. It felt like they needed to love it as much as us. And it felt like he did. And, of course, that's when the negotiations started with Disney.
Yeah, so Disney arrives on the scene, and we know the ending to that story. So tell us, what is it like to have been bought by a media giant like Disney?
Again, see, it'd be better if I was a parallel entrepreneur. I don't know anything else, but I think it's good. I've talked to a lot of people. In fact, the negotiations took a long time, probably like 4 months, 5 months, which people say isn't so long, but it felt like an eternity. Felt like a really long time, especially since we sort of had this A round in limbo, right? It was sort of annoying. We were saying, look, we're happy to not do this. Can we just like wrap it up and say, let's not do it, so we can go do our A round, like, or do it, but can we just, let's get to it. And one thing about Disney, right, is they're just so big. Like you're not getting the attention that the larger deals are getting, right? So so things move slowly. Things move really slowly. But we were fairly worried. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people when my advisors found out that we were selling, and I had 5 advisors, they started introducing to people who'd exited. And I didn't meet with a single person who had a good story. I mean, not one. I mean, they had horrible stories. I mean, horrible, like shouting in the room and leaving and stomping out. And, so we were just, such bad stories that we actually decided that it shaped how we structured the deal, which actually is confidential because we're an LLC, which is really unfortunate, I think. I really wish it wasn't, because I think it's such an important part of the story and learning. But anyways, it did shape our story because, you can read the writing on the walls. We thought, likely to go bad, right? So we can't count on that going well. Might go well, but might go badly. It sounds like it's going to go well. And in fact, it went really well. Part of what happened to us is we were approached to be bought at the same time by 2 media companies. And the other media company was very honest. They flew me to Silicon Valley, and they only wanted, which is where their VCs were. It was a new venture by a very large media company, and they wanted our technology. They were not interested in what we were doing at all. And so that was just not a good fit for us, and we were not interested. But then when Disney came, so we had just gone through that experience, and that's the other thing everyone's always telling you, which is really good advice, is that there's all these biz dev people, and we had ours from Disney. That's all they do is waste your time, right? So they just burn a ton of time coming out, and so they were really, said, be very careful with these people. And so they wanted me to sign a confidentiality agreement, and I said, no, I'm not, because I have this A round. I'm not. No, forget it. And kept sort of, pushing and pushing, and I just kept sort of pushing them off. And at some point, and partially because the first experience was like, and I was very respectful because honestly, Disney is a great exit for us on a number of levels. But finally, the president of the Walt Disney Interactive Group, so Disney's actually multiple companies, and with presidents that report to Bob Iger. So the head of the Walt Disney Interactive Group, Steve Wadsworth, the head of all of Disney Interactive, Paul Yanover, and the head of Disney.com. So this army of Disney execs came. And we were very intrepid. And that's where they asked to see my roadmap, and I said no. And but the more we talked, at some point Paul Yanover said, you're what we think Disney magic artists should be. And I said, oh, we think that too. We think Disney magic artist sucks. We think we'd be great at that. And then it was this, and they said, we love what you're doing. We don't want to change it at all. We want to get out of your way. And in fact, if you go to Disney.com now, today, the thing we've really been working on the last year and that we've launched that we're extremely proud of is on Disney.com, it says Games, Video, Create. And every single thing under Create was created in Boulder, Colorado. And so now you have, and the New York Times wrote a very warm article about it in the print paper, which, if you go, 2 things that are very interesting, right? So this is a media company that all they do is push content, right? They're the masters of creating amazing content, beloved content that we all warm to. They've brought kids into that creative process. So now kids are creating drawings that are published there. Kids are creating comics that they're publishing there. And when you go to the homepage, when you log in, your art actually features on the homepage, the last 3 things you've done. And then if you go to Digital Painter, it's just a white page. It's just a quiet white page. And the article said they thought that Walt would have been proud. So that was really nice.
And then you get the Mickey on your signature line of the email. That's so cool. I still want one of those. I think we have time for one last question, and then we can open it up to the audience for questions. A little bit of crystal ball time. You can tell Krista really is passionate about kids and computing and online learning. So tell us how you see that field emerging. Tell us the future.
Well,
we can all go start new companies.
Okay, so the most noisy, but I think the most nascent market right now that if I was an entrepreneur I'd be running towards is iPhone apps. and tablet stuff. I think that for kids is an amazing opportunity on so many levels. I think all of Surface technology is interesting. I think iPod Touch is just the beginning. One of the things, and by the way, if you're interested in that, the Joan Gantz Cooney Center, and I don't think it's closed yet, but for the best learning app for kids, they're offering $50,000, and I don't think you have to have a demo. Like, you have to have a good idea. And it's just hard to get the word out about stuff like that. And they have a $10,000 with a partnership with the electric company. It's a huge opportunity. Joan Gantz Cooney Center is the digital media arm of Sesame Workshop. They're an amazing group of people, and I love what they're doing. So I am interested in learning, and I think, to me, what's really interesting is that the reality with all of the technology, we've really not moved the needle on the digital divide. The reality is our kids that are struggling are still struggling, and it hasn't really helped them. And my hope, and I think that the potential now is just part of a thinking group at Google actually talking about this, and I left very encouraged at smart people that are thinking about this, but is that the iPhone and the iPod Touch actually do offer us an opportunity to really move the needle. The number one determining factor of a kid's success is their vocabulary when they're 9, more than anything else. And the reality is most of us, by the time we're 9, speak about 400 words as our verbal vocabulary. But a child that comes from a rich literary household that has papers and books and parents that engage with them have a much larger reading and comprehension vocabulary. And so there's very interesting opportunities with applications that are coming out to augment what a parent can do in terms of learning and vocabulary that would be hard to do otherwise because you're a single parent, you're distracted, you just don't have time. So I think there's a real interesting initiative to put a mobile phone, not a mobile phone, but a mobile device in every kid's pocket and really make this sort of a national initiative to help kids.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much. And I think we have time for questions. Is that right? Yes? Okay. Teresa.
I was wondering about your legal counsel. I mean, what can you share about lessons learned about working with attorneys and how...
I'm so glad you asked. This is my favorite topic.
Want to repeat the question?
Okay, so the question was, what can you tell me about legal counsel and in legal, the legal experience you had? So... first of all, I got really lucky because Bradfield recommended Cooley, and I worked with Michael Platt and an associate of his, Bryn Weaver, and they were rock stars. But it was very interesting because what happens, I think, typically when you take VC money is the VCs are very involved in the acquisition. So we were unusual because we had never taken money, and so there was me and Mike Platt. And so Disney, very early on, reached out to Mike Platt to ask him a question. And I was furious. And I said, if you reach out to him again, he can bill you. And they said, well, isn't he your legal counsel? And I said, I'm my legal counsel. He advises me. And so, not to say, and one thing I did with, and the reason Mike said the relationship worked really well is we were always a united front. So they couldn't go to him and say, wow, first-time entrepreneur, you don't know what you're doing. They couldn't go to me and say, oh, the lawyer is just trying to get this. We were really like this. And I met with him and I said to him, I remember meeting with him and saying, this is critically important to me that you and I be a united front. He's like, oh, that's so great. A lot of entrepreneurs don't get that. He's probably just being nice to me. But anyways, it was true. It worked really well. It was really important because I think there is a number of times where the biz dev person was very aggressive in trying to push me and absolutely said things like, oh, your lawyers are trying to do this or whatever. And I just didn't go there with them at all. And I think it's interesting, the sale of a business is sort of could be its own book. It's really, it's sort of its own interesting, you have to like negotiation. It's certainly at the end of the day, it's a negotiation. I'll say one more thing about that I think served us really well is the 4 founders got together and decided what was important to us. We wrote it down, and we never strayed from it. We said those are our non-negotiables. It wasn't outrageous. It's not like we're smart. We understood kind of what was reasonable, but we also understood what we wouldn't budge on. So we wouldn't leave Boulder. We wanted everyone hired. Just things like that, right? That were critically important to us.
Questions? Yes, this gentleman right here. You.
Okay.
Yeah.
Krista, I know something you've done very well is hire engineers. I'm wondering if you could say something more about that, like what happened when your network ran out and you had to kind of go outside for the first time? Did you use recruiters? Did you, what specific tactics did you do to build that great team?
Well, I hate
The question was?
The question was, I know, Krista, something you've done really well, his words, not mine, is hire great engineers. Is there advice you could give once you were through with your network at hiring to use recruiters? And I'm really sorry in a way to admit this because, actually, I can still answer it interestingly. So the reality is I have not run out of my network. Everyone we've hired, we've worked with previously. And we have more people that we'd like to hire, though, I mean, arguably there are limits. But I certainly would use recruiters. I mean, one of the things is Disney has a recruiter. I don't actually think it's the best way. One of the things that I have always done, I did this when I was at Xilinx, and I do it now, is I have relationships with the university. Bruce Saunders actually runs a wonderful program teaching where the students, the engineers actually work with companies, and we've done that. So just so if you don't know, it's really good as an entrepreneur actually because you get free labor. To graduate, engineers have to work with a company on a project. And so about 60 companies, 100 companies put in for this, and I think about 15 are awarded, and we've been awarded it 3 times now. And one of those people we've actually hired full time. So that was a way we got someone, a young person that started. Of the 3 groups we had, he was just a superstar, and so we brought him in, and he's been amazing. So I think to me, you're always hiring. And so cultivating the relationships with the university, cultivating relationships with engineers that you like and their friends. I think the best engineers are always employed, not always in this market, actually. I should be very careful because that has changed. I know a lot of good engineers that are not employed right now. But when times are not bad, usually your best employees are taken care of. That has changed now, so I need to be careful what I say. Talking about when someone says to you, wow, I have this amazing engineer I work with, following up on that and doing it. I always tell my staff, I actually interview every single person we hire. And in fact, some people are like, really? You're going to hire the content, you're going to interview the content moderators. And I spend a really long time with people, and sometimes I bring them back and I do it again. I have a really awful interview. But I think the very most important thing you do as a manager absolutely is hire. If you do nothing else well, you have to do that well. Nothing else matters. And so when people don't spend a lot of time doing that, it always amazes me. Our teams meet about it, we talk about it, we think about what we're going to ask. I have the same people ask the same questions, so we build up a rapport together. Hey, when you asked that last time, and how did they do that problem last time? So it's hard when you're first starting, but I think that can be useful. I think for an entrepreneur that doesn't have a strong engineering team, I would find good engineers. I would say, Krista, can you come and interview? I'm hiring this critical person. Or name engineer X, right? That is great, that respects, to augment your interview, right? Because the other thing I believe in specifically, and I have a lot of strong opinions about hiring engineers, is I always make them do problems, and I make every single interview that is a technical person interviewing them ask problems, and I believe my interview is IP, so I don't typically share publicly my interview, but I ask problems that make people squirm. That they don't really answer, and I think so. My best engineers love a good problem. Oh, that's interesting. Wow, I thought about that. I'd be like, really? You want me to solve that? I haven't taken that since I was a freshman. I didn't even take it then, right? I mean, can I have a phone book? I've had someone ask me one time. Can I use Google? No. And then, or they say something vague, and I say, well, now I want a number. Do a calculation, back of the envelope calculation. Being able to do a back of the envelope calculation. Can someone still do that, right? So there's lots of things that I think really are important for hiring. Recruiting is one tool, right? So it's one tool. You get resumes. We just got a resume actually from someone from a recruiter that came through, and 2 of my staff, I don't even have a position, and 2 people on my staff called them, and we like them a lot. And I'm actually thinking of going to my boss to say, we didn't expect to really like this person, but we're kind of dazzled. Like, we kind of need a rec now, and I'm sure we won't get it, but right? So right on, I mean, still, it was worth calling because the resume looked interesting. Did that help?
No, really.
Okay, next question. But there was one in the back a minute ago. Do you want to ask it now?
Sure. I'm curious to know, at what point in your development did you decide to step out to get support, for instance, from an organization like Common Sense Media, who's going to advocate for you and analyze your product, and then say, oh, in fact, this is really good for kids?
Well, so it's funny you say Common Sense Media, because actually at a conference I met the CEO of Common Sense Media, and oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you for saying that. I'm really bad at that. So when did you decide to get outside support? Like go to someone like a PR firm or Common Sense Media that could advocate for your product, right? There are people who will review your product and do it. Let me answer shortly that I don't feel like we ever did that well. If I could do one thing differently, I would throw some money at PR. I have now since become convinced that though it's obscenely expensive, that some good PR money for a consumer play is worth spending at some point. So it's probably sooner than we did. That being said, I was actually at an event where I happened to be the CEO of Common Sense Media, and they offered to write and wrote about Kerpoof. So I got lucky. So I think you can also meet, and if you connect with people, I mean, it's a little more ad hoc, but I mean, that also can help. If you don't have the funds to do that right away, you can still get people to be on your side and advocate for you.
Okay, next question. Yes, right here.
Hi, are there functions within the company that you would have contracted out rather than hire, or that you would now have contracted instead of hire?
Yes, IT.
Will you repeat it?
Were there things you would have contracted out that you didn't contract out? In hindsight, and I said IT. I don't know. You just don't have any money, so you just do what you have to do. And at first it was fine, but eventually we had a group of engineers. It's not a big deal, but we had a big group of artists and moderators, and we had a pretty diverse staff, and even the engineers. Then the engineers were helping debug other people's IT problems. I mean, IT is just always something that's there. And actually, I mean, we get some support from Disney now, but we still don't even have someone, and we probably should. So sometimes I'm doing IT, like it's crazy. It's crazy. Oh, actually, it's just answer. I know this is just a side, but one of the things that I think is interesting is I think there's a sense of being CEO. So I was CEO, and there's a reality of being CEO. So let's just say if you happen to be one of the entrepreneur people who thinks you'll probably be the CEO or aspire to be, and I did aspire. That was the role I wanted. Is the most unglamorous job. And not that it doesn't. I mean, you're the face of the company, and so there's lots of fun things that come with that. But it's very interesting, right? You really do anything. I mean, you go and get paper towels because you need paper towels. I mean, you do whatever needs to be done to keep the team successful and moving forward, and that turns out to be this very IT, right, human resources. Like it just turns out to be this huge swath of things. But I mean, it's not a bad thing, but it's just a surprising thing, I think.
There's a question over here. Yes.
I'm curious how your role changed in the transition now to working with Disney, and what does your day-to-day task look like? How does that management look like? Can you speak about that?
So the question is, how did your day-to-day role change once Disney bought you? And I mean, many things have remained the same. I still lead, first and foremost, the strategy and vision for what we do. And that hasn't changed. The things that, and I still run, I have a budget that I run separate to my boss's budget. So they carved that out separately. So I actually still have my own budget that I run, which is not, it's a bigger budget, but it's the same as having a budget that I had before. I think I mean, it's not that interesting, but one of the two biggest differences is now with Disney, I spend a lot of time talking, in fact, most of my time talking and working with people at Disney. So Disney is a content provider, and we've created applications that can feature that content. Okay, so for instance, a comic book creator, or a little more recent instance. So Disney did a TV show called Starstruck. And we don't always do this, but this is a good example of the kind of conversation I'll have. And they wanted a photo mashup, which is a designer activity, to support Starstruck. And so they met with me a couple months ago, and we talked about what that would look like and how we would do that and where we would launch that and how we would promote it. So we never had conversations like that. I think that the conversations that I did have, so there's those conversations, which frankly are a lot less stressful than the conversations around closing an A round, closing a large sale. Right before the A round, we were working on closing a deal with Crayola. Right, so those kind of, in some ways similar, but different. In those cases, it felt more intense, right, because it's those next deals that are really going to make it. Where now, in some ways, it is it's stressful in a different way, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't less stressful. I mean, I'm a workaholic, so it's never not stressful because it's just what I do, but it's not the same stress that you have as a startup.
Oh, maybe Brad.
Okay, Jill and I are debating if we should wrap this up, and so then Brad raises his hand. So Brad, you get the last question.
Well, first of all, this was just fantastic. But I'm also delighted that your engineering background before becoming an entrepreneur. We've got a lot of students here, especially from the ITP program, who are technically oriented. Looking back in retrospect to what would have been helpful to pick up while you were in college, even if you knew that it was going to be a while before you became an entrepreneur, is there anything that you would have done differently in terms of your university experience or graduate school experience that would have positioned you to become an entrepreneur?
So the question is, looking back, is there anything I would have done differently as an undergraduate, knowing I'd eventually be an entrepreneur? And I think, certainly I would have taken finance. That would have served me well, seriously. It's learnable, but I think everyone should be made to take some basic finance. I think it would have been really helpful. And I think having finance, and I don't know if schools are doing this now, but particularly there's a finance program that's really about finance for a small business. And one of the things that you have to do, and it doesn't matter that it's not true, but it's really helpful, is you do have to forecast money and revenue, right? What your expenses are, all of that. Right? You have to do this in a way that, again, it's learnable. It's all learnable if you haven't taken the class. But it would be so helpful, I think, in so many ways. Even in Xilinx, when I look back and I think of the budgeting stuff we did, in many ways, the knowledge I have now from doing my own business and budgeting would have been so much better then. And by the way, just on a totally separate note, because terminology has changed. Information technology is used in a couple of different ways. I just want to clarify, because information technology, we have people that really specialize in information technology and support organizations, support large companies, whatever. But information technology, and I'm just realizing this with Lucy's statement next to me, has taken on a larger meaning. And in fact, especially in the academic community, and I think it's rolling over in the general community, it's really encompassing everything technology and engineering and careers around that. So the National Center for Women in IT is actually about technology in general. So we do have to be careful with terminology.
Well, and thank you. One of the things that I also wanted to say, because we didn't get a chance to talk to Krista about this, but throughout this entire time and the time I've known her, she has also been incredibly generous with her time giving back and working with groups like F.I.R.S.T Robotics and NCWIT. And entrepreneurs are crazy, like she said. And we didn't even get to talk to her about her life and work balance, which we know, she was none. Okay, we know the answer there. None. We prefer to say it's integration, right? Whatever that means. But through that time, she has been incredibly generous in giving back to the community. So we really want to thank you for that, Krista, and also for just a wonderful session tonight. Thank you.